It's great to be here and great to see everyone. A few familiar faces. It's been a while since I've attended one of these, let alone spoken. So great to be here. I'd like to start my talk with a story about Elixir developer's journey into building ambitious, multifaceted software. When they first started Elixir, for the first 2 years, they were building software for the edge in data centers, talking over networks. They were building so-called collectors, which were moving data from A to B, from the edge into some core network. And they were built using some of the basic building blocks in OTP and the Elixir standard library, gen servers, supervisors, applications. There was no HTML, JSON, or well in sight. But alas, that came to an end, and year 3 on, the developer moved into more multifaceted, larger systems that had to deal with persistence, integrating with third-party SaaS and APIs, and heaven forbid, having some user interaction. And the developer started to wonder about this kind of larger scale application and all different concerns and the different touch points around, and the concerns for things like validation, authorization, authentication, auditing, background jobs. It goes on. These are all in Elixir's wheelhouse. All building, or most of us, if we are working with Elixir, are building applications like this, and we're all thinking about these kinds of concerns. So, of course, the developer I'm talking about is myself. And the questions I'm asking myself are, where should I put this new code in the code base? How do I introduce this cross-cutting concern? But digging deeper into that, I'm also asking, how can I do this in a way that keeps the code base organized and in a way that's consistent, so that it works with all the other cross-cutting concerns I have in my app? And sort of drilling even further, how can I do this in a so that I won't forget to do this when I'm under time pressure of a deadline, and in a way that's easy for others to find, understand, extend, and maintain? And I'm sure we all ask these questions all the time. So in the Elixir space already, in Phoenix and Plug, we've got the model view controller architecture, which some guide rails on where bits of our code should go. We've got Plug, we've got Phoenix, we've got Ecto. And then in more recent years, concept of Phoenix contexts, bounded context was added. And if you stack Phoenix contexts with some libraries and patterns for different concerns you have, like validation or authorization, authentication, you can tame the unruly beast. And one particular framework that I got to use, which I really liked, was Commanded, which is a command query responsibility segregation event sourcing library. And I found that the primitives in Commanded, so aggregates, command and event structs, event handlers, process managers, really put guide rails on an application. Found that very useful to know that a certain thing I wanted to do was one of these primitives. But the projects that I worked on with Commanded came to an end, sort of around for what was next. And anyone who knows the history of Alembic will say this follows the whole arc of Alembic in recent years, because framework stumbled upon me one day in Surrey Hills in Sydney when I was down there a few years back. Sort of heard a bit about Ash, didn't really know what it was, but we just made the dive into using it as a company. So for anyone who's not familiar with Ash, it's a declarative application framework for Elixir. So declarative meaning it describes what to do, not how to do a particular task, or to implement a particular feature. And it's an application framework, not a web framework. Described as resource-based, because at the base level, Ash is about the modeling the nouns and the verbs of your domain. And it's agnostic of user interfaces, API technology, or persistence layers. It can work with Phoenix, can work with Plug, can work with Postgres through Ecto, or other persistence layers. So yeah, kind of what Ash is for the uninitiated. Who are familiar with Ash and who are familiar with some of Josh's talks will recognize the image also on the blog. And it talks about the essence of Ash. And what we really want to do for our end users, for our clients, is the secret sauce. We have this iceberg of our application, and the secret sauce is the differentiators, the values above the waterline. But we have to do all number of things that are below the waterline that routine should have been solved, viewed by both developers, customers, and end users as mistakes and low value. And yeah, Ash is a framework that allows us to take that separation, do the basics easily, and get on with the secret sauce. So in exploring Ash, I came to the realization that it provided an answer to my questions, along with, you can do with, say, Phoenix contexts and many other patterns and libraries, the ecosystem. Ash provides another answer for all the questions I had about code organization. And I realized what I wanted was a framework that helped me do the right things as the application I'm working on changes, evolves, people come and go. And I wanted a framework that has a place for everything and everything in its place. Hence the title of the talk. So, well-known saying, place for everything in its place. And I think it describes Ash Framework very well. Think about that phrase and other phrases. Two workplace terms come to mind. So there's class and 5S, also hence the title of my talk. And yeah, talk is basically about framing Ash around the first. Won't have time to go through the second of these two in much detail. So mise en place is a French culinary term. It means putting in place or gathering. And yeah, about having all your ingredients ready to go comes to preparing a dish. A Wikipedia article, if you are interested in learning more, although it's a little bit sparse. I can't claim credit for this phrase in association with Ash. I believe Josh may have put this in something. I don't know if it's on the website anywhere, but in my view, sums up what Ash provides us building applications. The other term used was 5S, and that's a organizational method, Japanese time manufacturing, that sort of the same ethos as production system, etc. Kanban. Yeah, it's about for ease of use, etc. So this is an example of a resource corner in a factory. See, it's sort of visually everything's neat and tidy. There's instructions for how to use things. It's very clear when certain parts, tape, etc., paper are missing. And previous life, I worked in a factory that implemented 5S and really liked it. Before, never since has my desk been so tidy. The days of 5S organization. So what are the S's? 5 phrases in Japanese, also been translated into English: sort, set in order, shine, standardize, and sustain. And as much as I'd love to talk about how Ash and 5S relate, I don't have time. So that will be a topic for potentially for another talk in the future. You can find out more on the Wikipedia page. So let's go back to mise en place and how a culinary philosophy relates to code. So in my previous life, developing edge collectors, very typical supervision tree that we're probably all familiar with. And it's never come into Elixir thinking we'll make gen servers out of everything, but we learn that if we're building web applications, that's done all for us. But in the case of the edge collectors, it was this architecture. The ingredients in this case were these building blocks from OTP and the Elixir standard library wrappers around them: gen servers, supervisors, applications. And for the lightweight network services that I was building, these edge collectors, these basic building blocks takes you a long way. You can have a very neat and tidy application that's built around a supervision tree. high performance, high reliability, all is good. But when it comes to multifaceted apps, more ambitious software, what can Ash provide us in terms of ingredients? So, as I mentioned, Ash is a declarative framework. The basis is a domain-specific language, and that DSL defines the resources, actions, cross-cutting concerns, and all the things that make up those. So we're now going to do a bit of a whirlwind tour of some fairly low-level things in Ash. Be very familiar to a lot of the people on the here, but hopefully you what I mean about bringing all the ingredients together. All right. So as mentioned, the resources are one of the bases of Ash. It's a resource-oriented framework. They're the nouns of our system. So very typical example, here's a blog post, and this is what it looks like in Ash. If you squint, it looks like an ecto schema, I guess, but you can see here that we're persisting with Postgres, and we have a post that has some attributes or fields, primary key, title, content, published at, with some data types, standard at this point, fairly familiar to anyone who's worked with the likes of ecto. Alongside, or inside, I should say, actions, and they're the verbs in our system. So here we've got that of that same module or resource. Got some actions here. One of the features of Ash, and why I think it has a place for everything, and everything in its place is sensible defaults. So we have a read action, just reads everything. It can be default, doesn't need any customization. And then we've got a create action called create draft that accepts a couple of the attributes the blog post had on it, remembering it had title, content, and published at. And then we've got some examples of how to use that. Typos have crept in there. Like ecto, Ash uses the concept of change sets for updates and deletes. And here we're creating a change set to call our create action, which is called create draft, passing a title and content. Ash has the concept of passing an actor around that's just built in to the framework and works everywhere. And then we go ahead and create it. And then for the read action, the change set, it's called a query. We can read, and we can filters and a whole lot of other manipulations to queries. Here's just an example of a very basic read that gets all posts published more than 30 days ago. So the first actions we saw, read and the create, didn't do much, but we can add some more. So let's add that only returns drafts. So we add in a declarative way a filter expression. Ash has a built-in expression language, and here we get all posts that have a nil published at, which we classify as draft posts. And we have an update action called publish, which sets the published at attribute to now the current time. But we do have a problem with that publish action, in that we can keep calling it and it will keep updating the published at. We really don't want it to do that. We only want it to set that time once. So a cross-cutting concern that's built into Ash is validation. So here we can add a validation to our publish action that says publish at must be absent. So if published at is, this is basically saying, is it nil? And if it's nil, it's okay to run this. Otherwise, we won't, and we'll get a validation error. Resources, of course, don't live in a vacuum, where implications are going to be made up of dozens of them. So how do we relate them? So let's add a user resource and relate that to posts. So in our post, we add a different part of the DSL, not actions or attributes, but relations. In this case, we're saying we're going to relate to the user resource and call that an author, and say must have an author. Then, but an interesting concept in Ash is that relationships and several other cross-cutting concerns don't come back when you data by default. So here we're get this post, and you can see that the author has this funny type, Ash not loaded. It's not until we load this case directly with a function call, but it also can be passed as an option, that we actually get that related data back. So here we get the same blog post back, but with an author this time. You're familiar with Rails, Ecto, all the different types of relationships supported, has many, belongs to, etc. And do fancy things. We can, I guess you could almost call them virtual relationships. So in this case, let's relate a post, a user, to their first post. And so in this case, we not only specify the resources are related, but we can add things like a filter and a sort. And that filter is also in the expression language and is usable in a lot of other places in the Ash DSL. Of course, we can't just let anyone's blog post. So with our, we have an update, changes the title, we'll need some authorization in place. So an Ash has in the form of policies. So here we've got a policy that says we can only update a kind of update on this resource if we as the actor are the author of that post. And then also at the same time would say if author can read any of their own posts, they're authorized. And you can also say anyone can read a published post that's now become public. And so that's the second authorized if in the highlighted bit there, again, is using expression language to build up a more sophisticated policy. And once policies are turned on, they apply all the time across the entire framework. But other capabilities in Ash, like calculations, say we want to have a virtual field called status that tells us if it's a draft or a published blog post. There's a calculation DSL, again, using the same built-in expression language. We can do an update, a post, and then same chain, load there to see that the status has been updated. That's a real whirlwind tour of some pretty low-level stuff. And we've seen a whole bunch of parts of the low-level Ash DSL. There's a whole bunch more could have gone through, but it's the time. And I guess the real point is that these features are defined declaratively. They have consistent options, and they all fit together really well. So with these ingredients, we use them to build an application. These small pieces are all well and good. How do we bring it all together? So here's our blog post again. One thing we can do is add a code interface section that says, I want to be able to access the create draft action, or the create action is a case I've changed the name slightly, as a function, not through having to go through a change set. So having done that, you can call the create draft function just like a regular function. And this to me looks a lot like what you would in something like a context, or at least getting there. And it's the kind of sort of interface or boundary you want to put on your resources when you're accessing them from outside, say in a live view. Thing that another aspect of Ash that pulls everything together is domain resources. And domains are bounded contexts with the dials turned up to 11. So we're talking about blog.post, but there's a domain in there, just .blog, and they're defined using the Ash DSL. And in here we list our resources and and also define code interfaces at the domain level. So then we don't even have to call via post. It's just blog. Really starting to make it look like good by hand or with generators or what have you in something like a Phoenix context. And bringing everything together in domains and being able to specify other things, not just resources, but things we'll get to later on, what convinced me that Ash was a great answer to the questions I had about code organization. But there's another level. Ash can let us customize the ingredients, and we can break out of declarative mode and use Elixir if we want to, but it's in a controlled way. So here is a calculation. Say we want slugs for our posts, and we've got some library, some function somewhere, Slugify, and Slugify blog post by making a calculation that instead of using the inbuilt expression language, and provide an anonymous function that done this way with a map is you can the anonymous function can accept a large number of records that might have come back from a read, etc. You can do it all in one fell swoop. So have that extension point, break out of the declarative land. It's inside this point outside of that where the still in declarative land. Far we've seen some pretty basic actions, but actions can be infinitely complex. So my syntax highlighting is not working, but we've got a slightly more where not only do we want to set the published attribute, but we also want to send some notification out. So not only can we do this line with an anonymous function, we can actually call out to a change module. It's a behavior. It implements a behavior behind the scenes with a change callback. And again, my syntax highlighting seems to have stopped working. There's some typos there, but the main thing to show here is that the fourth line of code, the Ash changed it after action. So we break out of the declarative world, and we have the ability to hook into the lying in Ash through different lifecycle hooks. So there's an after action function here. There's before action, before and after transactions, and other hooks. So we can hook into the life cycle of Ash. We can hook into the points where we need to make customization. And this kind of is exactly how some of the built-ins that we've seen, that attribute DSL is actually implemented behind the hood. So that was a change module. You can use modules to implement many other features, calculations, validations, preparations. Haven't even talked about that. We've got this further level of extension and a further level of the ability to reuse code and keep things nice and tidy in modules with callbacks. So as I said, Ash allows us to our code ingredients, but there's even another level. So Ash, its DSL is powered by a library called Spark. Spark was kind of extracted from Ash. It's a DSL builder, and it's applicable to any DSL use case, not just Ash. And there are a few things out there that do use Spark, not directly related to Ash. And Spark programs, just like an Ash application, when they're compiled, they're data structures with a schema. And we can hook into that data structure, modify it. And we do that with what are called extensions and transformers. So I've taken this example from Ash, but here we're defining an extension, and basically it's adding just one thing into the DSL, this stamps question mark flag, which will automatically add timestamp attributes to a resource. So you find it in this, and then along with that, transformers to take data structures and modify them somehow. In this case, adding those attributes into the data structure, which ultimately becomes your running application. And here's just how the example shows that's used. So timestamps now available as a flag. So yeah, Ash extensions powered by Spark, and I think they really are the feature of Ash that help fulfill the tagline of model your domain, derive the rest. You sort of have the base Ash features and then use extensions to introspect, modify, generate more data structure to define more things in your application. And the Ash ecosystem is built around lots of useful extensions. So here's one to build API on top of Phoenix. Back to our blog post, in our domain, we can define some roots in a JSONAPI section. Here we've got /posts. We can read or many, create posts. And if we're to curl the read path with an ID, we get back some nicely structured JSON API formatted for a single post. And this is all declarative. There's no manual controllers here having to do this for each route every time. It's fully declarative based off the introspecting your resources. So yeah, a ton of really useful Ash extensions out there. Just an example of a few: Ash Authentication for multi-strategy authentication, GraphQL, Papertrail. It goes on, and you can try out a whole bunch of them on the getting started part of the AshHQ website. So all these ingredients: declarative DSL, extension points, being able to do things the right way in Ash because it makes it easy and it all fits together, all makes sense. Being able to seamlessly retrofit seemingly disparate things and gathering those ingredients at the meta level with extensions is why I say Ash has a place for everything and everything in its place. And hopefully I've convinced you of that. That's my GitHub, and I use some images, and here are their attributions. And that's it.